McGovern is our guest. Ray McGovern is a retired CIA officer and political activist. McGovern was a federal employee under 7 U.S. presidents in over 27 years. He presented the morning intelligence briefings to Ronald Reagan, George Herbert Walker Bush, and he was seen as one of the senior analysts in the CIA with wide spectrum knowledge of what was happening geopolitically around the world. He, of course, is very well known for confronting Rumsfeld and saying, "You said that the WMDs were into Crete." Rumsfeld said, "I did not say that." And then he said, "Well, here's the evidence." And then Rumsfeld got skewered in the media. He also predicted a year before that Cheney would try to stage a Gulf of Tonkin event off the coast of Iran with fake attacks on aircraft carriers. That indeed then did materialize. It's an amazing source of information. And he's also against all of these globalist wars. Ray, what is your bottom line take on what's happening in Libya, on the report here out of West Point, also being picked up by Asian Tribune, that it is Al-Qaeda that is being used to go after Gaddafi, who's obviously not a good guy himself. But here's the London Telegraph. The West and Al-Qaeda on the same side. Statements of support by Libya's revolution by Al-Qaeda and leading Islamists have led to fears that military action by the West might be playing into the hands of ideological enemies. We have the Fox News headline, Anwar al-Awlaki, exclusive, head of Al-Qaeda, leader dined at the Pentagon just months after 9/11. He's the patsy minder with his secret army. What is Al-Qaeda? What's happening in the Middle East? Why is this now happening? Why did an F-15E crash over Benghazi? I mean, there's so many questions. Ray, thanks for coming on with us.
Well, you're most welcome. There are a lot of questions, and it's supremely questionable as to whether we should be doing what we're doing in Libya. You know, the one thing that comes through very clearly is the fact that the hypocrisy that the U.S. has demonstrated in dealing with these Arab governments knows no bounds. Just go back a month or two and look at Egypt. Now, when Mubarak started to have problems, Hillary Clinton was very quick to say, it's a stable government. They're our friends. I've been at dinner with the Mubaraks and all that business. And they were all waiting to see what the army would do in Egypt. Okay. Now, the army, thank goodness, did the right thing. They didn't break up the demonstrators, and the tide turned. And as soon as the tide turned, then we have this back and forth, Obama saying, well, no, we support democracy. No, maybe Mubarak ought to go. So it was terribly cynical. They waited to see which way the wind was blowing, and then all of a sudden they supported democracy. Now, let's take a look at what's happening in Libya. Libya, we're ostensibly intervening to protect civilians, right? Now, how do you protect civilians? By bombing Tripoli, by trying to hit Gaddafi's palaces. It's a very misguided adventure here. There's no end in sight, nor will there be for many, many months. Meanwhile, and this is the real bottom line here, in places that really matter to us more than even Libya, that is Bahrain and Yemen, what are we doing there? Well, we not only waited to see what the army would do in Bahrain, for example, but we encouraged not only the Bahrainian security police and army, but also the Saudis to intervene in Bahrain and shoot up the demonstrators. So this time we're on the side of the government. Why? Well, very simple. Bahrain affords facilities that look like San Diego on steroids. I mean, that's where the whole Fifth Fleet is. That's the fleet that we have in the Persian Gulf. The other end of the Persian Gulf is Yemen. What are we doing there? Well, the authorities are shooting up the people. We're supporting the authorities. Why? Because Yemen is a very, very strategic position, and also the authorities allow our special forces to do whatever they want, our drones to do anything that they want in Yemen. So any Arab, any Egyptian, let's say, any Syrian, or even any Jordanian, Palestinian, looking on would say, my goodness, what kind of a policy is being waged out of Washington We have non-interference where it should be on the side of the Democrats. And then we have interference with, on behalf of whom? Well, we don't know on behalf of whom. Barack Obama has let himself be railroaded, be pressured into intervening into Libya, where there are enormous uncertainties. We don't know how deeply the forces will be committed, how long. We don't even know the identities of many of the rebels on whose behalf we're intervening. We don't know what the intervention is going to likely accomplish. We don't even know what it's intended to accomplish or how it will end. You know, this is about as stupid as you can get. Now, besides all that, we have a constitutional process in this government, or we're supposed to. We have a constitution that says that the power to make war is reserved to the representatives of the people in the Congress, not the executive. And yet, what did Barack Obama do? Well, he checked around with the UN. He got support in the UN. But did he get support in the Congress? He didn't even check with the Congress. He went off and did this all by himself. That's unconstitutional, and it's an impeachable offense. So, you know, here we have a president acting very much in the tradition, the very recent tradition of his predecessor, George W. Bush, where the president can pretty much support or commit our forces to feckless adventures such as the one that's just begun in Libya. Mark my words, this will have a no good end.
Ray McGovern, top retired CIA analyst, we're seeing Gates come out and say that we're going to cut air power and strikes, but then separately NATO and the Pentagon announce, even though he's the supposed head of the Pentagon, that they're intensifying the strikes in the same hour. We see the Germans not being part of this, the Turks not being part of it. We see Medvedev and Putin fighting with each other. Putin saying it's bad, Medvedev rebuking him for calling it a foolish crusade. I mean, this doesn't have, you know, the normal polished look of a new war. It does seem to be very helter-skelter, very confused. Now, I mean, is there some method to the madness, A? And how do you, from studying history, see this ending? What are the different scenarios?
Well, the only method in this madness, so to speak, would be the three-letter word OIL. Libya, of course, has lots of oil. Not only that, but it's the kind of pure oil that requires very little refining, and Western Europe is very much dependent on that oil. Now, the rest of the world is not so much dependent, but Western Europe is. So here we have oil being a primary consideration, as it is a primary consideration with how we're dealing with Bahrain and Yemen also, because that oil, 40% of the oil traded in international trade goes through the Strait of Hormuz, and of course the Fifth Fleet is there to make sure that it does. So in Libya, we have a situation where Gaddafi sits on top of all this oil. He's only got, I think, 4 million people in the country. So it should be not quite a piece of cake here, or a cakewalk, as they said about Iraq. But they're thinking, well, let's just get involved. You know, let's get involved, and then we'll find out who these people are that we're protecting, and maybe they're not Al-Qaeda, or maybe they are, but anyhow, we'll be in there, and then we can work our will, get Gaddafi out of there, and make sure that the oil in Libya is safe for Western Europe. That's pretty much it. You know, it's seldom so simple, but when you put oil on top of your reasons for either intervening or not intervening, it all makes sense in a very, very cynical kind of way, because, as you know, the world is running out of oil, and we've got to garner more than our share.
Well, expanding on that with Ray McGovern, Ray, looking at this, how do you see it ending? I mean, I had two questions there, but I mean, how do you, looking into your crystal ball, I know it's not 100%, but studying past history, the region, the bold, I've never seen a president move this quick to just ignore Congress and let the other 9 that voted for it basically control our foreign policy, unprecedented there. Totally unconstitutional. Republicans' mom, Democrats' mom, except for a few anti-war Democrats raising the Constitution. and you then have the unconstitutional, I know there's an executive order against trying to assassinate people. It's also international law. They now basically admit that they did try to target Gaddafi with cruise missiles and bombs. I mean, this is quite an escalation.
Well, it is. And I guess you mentioned the word bold to describe Obama's quick reaction here. In my view, there's a thin line between bold and irresponsible. I go on the irresponsible side to characterize this ill-considered intervention.
So you're saying it's brash, it's not thought through?
That's exactly right. Yeah, I think we're really pretty much saying the same thing, but it's also irresponsible in the sense that it doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, here he says that the objective of the operation, that is Obama, is limited to, quote, the protection of citizens, of civilians in Libya. Well, so that objective is, by nature, unlimited in duration. As long as civilians need to be protected in Libya, then we have, quote, the right under the president's statement to stay there.
Well, Ray, to interrupt, Hillary also said, and so was Obama in statements, you will accept an international aid force that will obviously be armed, NATO, UN, backed up by the Western powers, or else. Well, I mean, that right there is saying you will accept an invasion, a ground invasion, and they've got the troop ships off the coast.
Yeah, it's, the important thing here is the end game and what's going to happen at the very end, and that's really very much up for grabs. Admiral Mullen apparently admitted on the Sunday TV shows that it could end up, could end up with Gaddafi still in power. And so if Gaddafi's still around, have we still accomplished the mission? What is the mission accomplished? There can be no declaration of a mission accomplished as long as our objective is to protect the civilians in Libya. The reality on the ground is that we mean to get rid of Gaddafi. We couldn't get the others at the Security Council to agree to that kind of language, but we're going to do it anyway. And please, don't talk about international law. Don't you remember we're with the sole remaining superpower in the world? We don't have to worry about international law. If the Europeans will cooperate with us on this because they have even more at stake of it than we do because of the oil from Libya. So it's a very cynical sort of set of circumstances, and the long-term effects of this will be that any Arabs that have any conscience or a sense of fairness will look at this and say, see, that's what we thought the Americans were like. You can't trust them, and by and by, we're going to get rid of those corrupt kings in Bahrain and Yemen, and we're going to have those places to our own. And then we'll see what kind of influence the U.S. will have in this part of the world. It's a losing game. I can't believe that Obama is being so naive.
Yeah, totally going away from soft power at a time when the military is spread so thin. What about the terror card? We're seeing unbelievable hype starting last Friday that if Gaddafi was struck, and he's now been struck via the resolution and the bombardment's intensifying, that he will launch terror attacks in Western Europe and the U.S. Now, A, do you think Gaddafi would try to play a card like that, even though he gave up most of his terror networks? And B, could this be the open door for a false flag to legitimize the war? Because people won't pay attention to the fact that it was started by the West. So will he actually carry out an attack? Or could the West stage something to legitimize a full invasion and the further crackdown on liberty in the West?
Well, Alex, that's always a possibility. In these circumstances, I don't think the West has its act together to the degree that they're able to do that just now. They may end up doing that. But what you point out very specifically is the ridiculous argument here that Gaddafi is a really bad guy because he might unleash terrorists on us. That's backwards.